My name is Laura Woods. I'm 30 years old. On a sweltering Sunday night in the summer of 2026, I sat across from my own blood in a dining room, suffocating under the heavy smell of roast lamb and a struggling window AC unit. Oak Park, Chicago. I sat dead straight, hands folded on my lap, breathing even. I watched my father grip the edge of the mahogany table, his knuckles white, trying to hide the Parkinson's tremor, shaking his left hand. He cleared his throat. The patriarch holding court. The family talked, he ordered, his voice dripping with that old, unearned authority. You don't have a family of your own. You work from home. It's time you moved back here to take care of me. My brother Derek chewed loud, nodding his head. Yeah, I'm busy and Megan's about to pop. Pushing this to you just makes sense. My mother smiled. That sugary, toxic smile. He needs you, Laura. You have an obligation to this house. They looked at me like a free utility, a human checking account. They didn't notice my finger tracing the cold metal clasp of my purse. Inside sat a thick forensic accounting report and a phone storing the exact timeline of a drowning. Proof of the $47,000 in medical debt they forced me to swallow alone while I fought cancer. Proof of the 80 grand they blew on Derek's country club wedding the very same month. The paper trail of their financial rot was sitting right on my lap. I didn't cry. I didn't slam my fists. I picked up my water glass and set it down hard. A sharp, dry crack against the glass coaster. The room went dead silent. I slid my phone across the table. The screen lit up the center of the spread. A hospital visitor log. 36 rounds of chemo. The visitor column stretched down the screen, repeating one single word, none. I watched the color drain right out of Derek's face. I tilted my head. My voice was a whisper, but it cut glass. You want to read the text where you told me to get a loan shark for my tumors? Or see the 2 a.m. call mom sent to voicemail? I leaned back. The act is over. If you've ever been the scapegoat in your own home, or if you know what it's like to be left bleeding by the people who share your last name, hit like, subscribe, and leave your local time in the comments below. The scrape of a silver fork gouging into a ceramic plate. A sound that grinds right past the eardrum. Sunday dinner in Oak Park. The window AC unit choked and rattled against the heavy Chicago heat. The colonial brick house felt like a locked trunk. The air was thick with the greasy smell of roast lamb. It coated the throat, fighting the suffocating stench of my mother's Chanel No. 5. I sat dead straight. My spine stayed rigid 2 inches away from the heavy wooden chair. I ran my thumb along my linen napkin, pressing a sharp crease into the fabric. Across the table, Derek chewed loud. Ice clinked in his bourbon glass. He checked his oversized gold watch, bored. Next to him, his wife Megan rubbed her pregnant belly, staring hard at a stain on the wallpaper. She wouldn't look at me. My mother Eleanor reached across the table, nudging a crystal water goblet, half an inch to the right. Everything had to look flawless. Richard sat at the head of the mahogany table. He gripped a serrated steak knife, his knuckles bone white. His left hand was buried under the tablecloth. I watched the thick linen fabric vibrate against his thigh. A violent rhythmic twitch. Early stage Parkinson's. The old man was terrified. He tried to hide the weakness, projecting his loud authority to cover the rot. My pulse stayed flat. Exactly 60 beats a minute. The ambush was coming. Richard cleared his throat. A harsh, wet bark. The scraping of silverware stopped instantly. The room went dead. He didn't ask. He didn't offer a plea. He handed down a mandate. The doctor says I need full-time daily support, Richard stated. His voice was hard flat. The family talked. You don't have a family of your own. You work from home. It is the obvious choice, Laura. You're moving back here into your old room to take care of me. Not a single apology. Just a blind assumption that my time and life were free resources sitting on a shelf for him to use. I manage complex data systems for a living. I make decisions that matter. To him, I was just a free utility. He didn't even bother to ask if my cancer was in remission. He didn't ask if the tumors had shrunk. He just claimed my survival as his own property. Derek jumped right in. The golden boy never missed a chance to dodge a heavy lift. Yeah, it makes the most sense. Derek muttered, wiping his greasy chin. My job is killing me right now. Plus, Megan is about to pop. We just don't have the bandwidth. You stepping up takes the heat off everyone. He shoved the crushing weight of a deteriorating man onto his sister's shoulders and went right back to chewing his dinner. Eleanor leaned forward. Her voice was pure syrup. He needs you, Laura, she cooed softly, weaponizing the word with perfect precision. You have an obligation to this house. We are family. The words hung in the hot air. I scanned their faces, collecting the data. Derek staring at his plate. Megan looking away. Eleanor wearing a tight, rehearsed plastic smile. Richard glaring, waiting for me to fold. A 30-year-old single woman. A convenient dumping ground for their messes. They saw me as an appliance. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't slam my fist on the wood. A thin, cold smile pulled at the corners of my mouth, but it didn't get anywhere near my eyes. I lowered my right hand. My fingertips brushed the cold metal clasp of my leather purse resting on the floor. Hidden inside that bag was my phone. The digital graveyard. The exact time-stamped record of how they happily left me to drown. I stared directly at the vibrating tablecloth, hiding Richard's shaking hand. The rattling of the AC unit faded into a dull hum. The greasy stench of roasted lamb washed away, completely replaced by the sharp, sterile sting of rubbing alcohol. The dim yellow light of the dining room bleached out into the blinding white fluorescence of a hospital corridor. They always thought I was easy to break. They forgot that 24 months ago, they killed that daughter with their own hands. Wednesday afternoon, 2024. My life was drawn in straight, heavy lines. I worked as a senior data analyst in downtown Chicago. Spreadsheets, numbers, predictability. My laptop cast a pale blue glow across the cluttered desk. A large black coffee sat untouched next to a stack of printed reports. Slack notifications pinged in a mechanical, relentless rhythm. I thrived on the strict routine of it all. Gym on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. Dinner at exactly 6:30. Every single dollar was accounted for. Every hour of my week was tightly mapped out. Everything boxed, controlled, safe. Then, the glass screen vibrated against the wood. An unknown number. A local oncology clinic. The nurse on the line didn't waste breath on pleasantries. Her voice was flat, tired, completely stripped of emotion. She told me to be at the doctor's office at 8 in the morning. I reached for my coffee. The heat was gone. The cardboard sleeve felt like solid ice against my palm. A deep, silent alarm triggered in the back of my skull. 8:00 a.m., Thursday. Dr. Patterson walked into the room, sat heavily on his rolling stool, and looked me dead in the eye. Breast cancer. Stage 3. Malignant. Aggressive. We need to start chemotherapy immediately. The tiny examination room felt like a vacuum. The air choked me with the thick stench of sterile wipes and cheap rubbing alcohol. Overhead, the blinding fluorescent tubes hummed. A relentless, maddening electrical buzzing that drowned out the rest of his medical jargon. I sat dead straight on the crinkling tissue paper covering the exam table. Both hands folded flat on my jeans. I took the information like a raw damage assessment. I didn't cry. I didn't gasp. A high-pitched ringing pierced my eardrums. The room tilted violently. I detached. I floated near the ceiling panels, staring down at a 30-year-old woman receiving a death sentence. Patterson looked up from his clipboard. Do you have someone to drive you home? The heavy steel plates I carried my whole life buckled. For the first time, I desperately wanted a safety net. The hospital hallway was dead quiet, save for the squeak of rubber soles on linoleum. I sank into a hard plastic chair against a bare white wall. The cold plastic seeped through my shirt, chilling my spine. My hands shook. A violent, uncontrollable tremor starting from the wrists. It took 3 agonizing tries to tap the right contact on my screen. Richard. The phone rang. Once. Twice. He picked up. What is it? He snapped. Irritated, deeply bothered by the interruption of his morning routine. I swallowed hard, tasting bile and metal. The dam broke. Hot, heavy tears spilled over my eyelashes, burning my cheeks and dropping onto my collarbone. Dad! I choked out. My throat was so tight I could barely push the words past my teeth. I have cancer. Stage 3. I'm really scared. Silence. A heavy, suffocating dead air settled on the line. I heard him breathing. It wasn't the ragged breath of a terrified father. It was an annoyed sigh. In the background, Eleanor's muffled voice echoed from the kitchen. "Who is it, Richard?" His response tore right through my eardrum. "Your mother and I can't deal with this right now, Laura." The voice was ice cold, flat, calculating. "Your brother is getting married. The wedding is in 4 months. We have to go pay the venue deposit today." He didn't even pause to let the reality settle. There was no pity, only extreme impatience. "You've always been independent. You'll figure it out." Click. The call dropped. He hung up to go rent a ballroom. I sat frozen on that plastic chair for 45 minutes. My phone remained pressed hard against my ear, listening to the dead dial tone. Strangers walked by in a blur of blue scrubs and quiet footsteps. The hot tears dried tight and itchy on my face, leaving salty tracks on my skin. A stranger would have offered a glass of water. My own father offered a dial tone. The daughter who desperately wanted her family died on that bench. If you have ever been left bleeding by the very people who were supposed to protect you, hit the like button and subscribe to my channel. Drop a 1 in the comments if you know exactly how heavy that dial tone feels. The screen on my phone went dark. I tapped the glass alive. My thumb hovered over the screen. I pulled up the recent call log. Richard. 08:47 a.m. 2 minutes, 31 seconds. I squeezed the side buttons. A sharp digital click echoed in the empty hallway. Screenshot saved. I moved the image into a new empty folder. I typed out the name in capital letters. Family. The screen faded to black. The grief evaporated. Only the ice remained. 4th floor, outpatient oncology. Chair 7. The IV pump clicked. A steady cold beep. The fluid dripped into my vein, leaving a heavy metallic taste thick in the back of my throat. I stared down at the scuffed beige linoleum floor. To my left chair, 3. A husband sat close, holding his wife's hand, whispering something that made her smile. To my right chair, 9. A teenage girl was carefully feeding her father ice chips from a styrofoam cup. Chair 7 had a metal pole and silence. I pulled out my phone. My thumb hovered over the glass screen. I typed a short message. "I'm scared, Mom. Hit send." I leaned my head back against the vinyl chair and stared at the water stains on the ceiling tiles. 6 hours passed. The chemo burned going in. Finally, the screen lit up. "Hang in there, sweetie." At the florist looking for Derek's wedding arrangements. Peonies or roses, I read it twice. My jaw tightened. I pressed the 2 side buttons on my phone. A sharp digital click. Screenshot. I typed back, my fingers moving mechanically. Roses are nice. I locked the screen. The machine kept beeping. The discipline of silence started right there. The bills hit a week later. Insurance covered the basics. Out-of-pocket maximums and copays did the rest. $47,000. A heavy stack of paper sitting on my kitchen counter like a concrete block. I sold my car. I survived on rice and beans. I canceled the heating service. The math still didn't work. Desperation has a specific crushing weight. It sits right on your chest. I swallowed my pride and texted Richard. I asked for a loan. 2 hours later, my phone buzzed on the counter. The reply was sharp. "We just paid off the venue and the caterer for Derek's wedding. 80 grand. We don't have spare cash right now. Put it on a credit card." They proudly threw $80,000 at a party. A country club vanity project. But they refused to throw a single lifeline to keep their daughter breathing. I deleted his contact photo. There was no room for my weakness in their house. Round 4. The aftermath hit hard at 02:10 a.m. I was curled up on the bathroom floor. The white ceramic tiles felt like solid ice against my bare skin. My body shook violently, muscles spasming from the sudden chills. I gagged into the toilet bowl until my stomach cramped, throwing up bitter, dark yellow bile. I wiped my mouth with the back of my shaking hand. Chunks of blonde hair stuck to my wet cheek. It was falling out in thick, ugly clumps. The shower drain was already clogged with it. 02:47 a.m. I grabbed my phone from the sink edge. I called Eleanor. 1 ring. 2. 8. "You have reached the voicemail of..." I hung up. I called again. 8 rings. Voicemail. I laid my sweating forehead against the freezing porcelain of the toilet tank. I gritted my teeth against a sharp pain tearing through my stomach lining. The naked truth was laid out under the harsh yellow vanity lights. I was entirely alone. I pulled up Harper's number. She was a trauma nurse, a real friend. Need help. She unlocked my front door 40 minutes later. The next morning, 10:23 a.m. The phone buzzed on the nightstand. Eleanor, I answered on speaker. Her voice was light, airy. Hey, sorry about last night. I had my phone on silent. Megan and I went to the spa to de-stress after all the wedding planning. Do you need something? I stood in front of the bathroom mirror. I looked at the bald patches on my scalp. My eyes were completely hollow. Dark bruised bags hung under them. No, Mom, I said. My voice was completely flat. I don't need anything. I hung up. That afternoon, Harper drove me to the clinic. I stood at the front desk and asked the receptionist for a printed copy of my visitor log. She handed me a crisp white sheet of paper. My name sat at the top. Below it, 36 separate entry lines spanning 6 months of treatments. I ran my finger down the visitor column. One word repeated over and over, printed in harsh black ink. None, none, none. I didn't rip the paper. I didn't crumple it. I folded it perfectly in half, creasing the edge hard with my thumbnail. I slid it into a brown manila folder and locked the metal clasp. The pain evaporated. Everything was ready. November 2024. The final round of chemo drained whatever marrow I had left. My body felt like a hollowed-out shell. I sat at my kitchen table chewing a piece of dry toast. It tasted like wet cardboard. The chemicals had completely burned out my taste buds. My phone buzzed against the cheap laminate counter. A group text from Eleanor. We need your old room cleared out by the weekend, Laura. Need space to store Derek's wedding gifts. The successful sister can compromise a little, right? He's the only son. My aunts chimed in below her message. Little thumbs up emojis. Heart icons. I stared at the glowing screen. I didn't type a defense. I didn't argue about how I had just finished poisoning myself to stay alive. I pressed the power button. The screen went black. They expected me to handle myself, pay my own way, and vanish when I wasn't useful. I gave them exactly what they wanted. Absolute silence. I drove to Oak Park that Saturday. The house smelled like stale air freshener and old dust. No one asked how I felt. No one asked if the drive exhausted me. I walked straight upstairs to my old bedroom. Derek and Megan stood in the middle of the floor. Cardboard boxes everywhere. The sharp, tearing screech of packing tape echoed off the bare walls. It was a sound that scraped the inside of my skull. I stopped in the doorway. My professional achievement plaques. My advanced data certification frames. The corporate awards I had bled for over 10 years, working 80-hour weeks. They were shoved haphazardly into a black plastic garbage bag. The bag sat crumpled right next to the wastebasket. Taking their place on my old bed was a high-end espresso machine and luxury silk sheets. Derek's wedding registry hall. My chest tightened. My heart rate spiked. 90 beats a minute. I closed my eyes for a fraction of a second. I drew a slow, heavy breath deep into my lungs. I forced the rhythm down. 80, 70, 60. I opened my eyes. Oh, hey, Derek mumbled. He barely looked up from taping a box of crystal glasses. Mom said you'd grab your junk. I didn't say a single word. I walked over, grabbed the thin plastic of the trash bag, and slung it over my shoulder. We sat around the kitchen island for lunch. Richard was holding court on his cell phone, his voice booming over the low rattle of the refrigerator. 80 grand. Richard bragged to whoever was on the other end, puffing out his chest. Yeah, well, you have to invest in the family's future. It's going to be a hell of an event. I chewed a piece of dry bread. I let him play his part. Narcissists always slip up when they are drowning in their own manufactured glory. I kept my eyes down, watching Eleanor across the granite counter. She was nervously shuffling a stack of mail. I watched her slide 3 joint credit card statements underneath a pile of old newspapers. She patted it flat, looking over her shoulder. The rot was right there, hiding in plain sight. After lunch, I hauled my trash bag up the pull-down wooden stairs into the attic. The air up here was thick, stifling. The heavy, musty smell of forgotten things coated the back of my throat. Dust motes danced in the single beam of sunlight cutting through the small window. I dragged a cardboard box out of the corner to make room for my bag. My elbow clipped an old wooden crate. A stack of Richard's dusty ledger books tumbled onto the plywood floor. I knelt on the hard wood to pick them up. A loose piece of paper slipped out from between the yellowed pages. It fluttered to the floor landing, face up in the dim light. I picked it up. A bank transfer receipt from 3 years ago. I recognized the date. I recognized the amount. $20,000. The exact sum I had wired home when Richard claimed the roof was caving in, and he couldn't get a bank loan. I looked at the beneficiary line. It didn't go to a roofing contractor. Transfer to Derek Woods, auto loan account. They took the money I earned and used it to buy their golden boy a new car. I didn't cry. My eyes just went dead cold. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I opened the camera app. I tapped the screen, locking the focus sharply on the printed numbers. Click. The first real crack in their financial empire was now saved in my pocket. December 2024, downtown Chicago. The winter wind hammered against the thick floor-to-ceiling glass of the high-rise office building, rattling the heavy window panes. Outside the city was a freezing gray blur. Inside it was dead quiet. Just the low mechanical hum of the HVAC unit pushing recycled warm air into the room. The carpet was thick, swallowing the sound of my boots. I sat across a massive cold oak desk. Mr. Vance, an attorney specializing in estate disputes and financial fraud, pushed his wire-rimmed glasses up his nose. He looked at me with flat professional eyes. No pity, just business. I didn't offer a sob story. I didn't need sympathy. I unzipped my leather bag. I pulled out a thick stack of printed bank statements and the photograph of the $20,000 transfer receipt I had found in the dusty attic. I set them down on the wood. A dull, heavy thud. I laid out the timeline exactly like a quarterly data report. Cold, precise, stripped of all emotion. Vance picked up the pages. He started reading. His forehead creased. The silence in the room grew heavy, suffocating. To build an airtight case, the bank records weren't enough. A signature can be disputed. I had to establish intent. I had to prove the financial abuse was a conscious, calculated choice. I unlocked my phone. I opened the text threads. I pushed the glowing screen across the polished wood. Showing a stranger the rotting insides of your own family is a specific kind of hell. It is entirely humiliating. I was paying a man $300 an hour to confirm that my own parents looked at me and saw nothing but an ATM. I watched Vance scroll through Eleanor's sugary, manipulative texts. I watched his eyes track over Richard's flat refusal to help with my $47,000 medical debt. Every swipe of his finger felt like a serrated blade dragging across my ribs. The shame burned hot in the back of my neck. My hands rested on the armrests of the leather chair. I gripped the padded leather until my knuckles turned bone white. My pride was bleeding out on that oak desk. I swallowed the hard, bitter lump in my throat. I forced my breathing to stay even. In through the nose, out through the mouth. I didn't let my voice shake, not even a fraction. An hour passed. The HVAC unit kicked off, leaving a ringing silence. Vance squared the edges of the paper stack. He closed the manila folder. Smack. The sound was sharp, dry, and final. He took off his glasses and looked at me. The professional neutrality was gone. His jaw was tight. His voice was hard. "This is blatant embezzlement, Laura," Vance stated. "They didn't just redirect the $20,000 you sent for the roof. They illegally leveraged a joint family trust. Your father forged your signature as a co-signer to cover the $80,000 catering and venue bills for Derek's wedding." He pushed a thick, newly bound document across the desk. It carried the sharp chemical smell of fresh printer ink. A heavy red legal stamp sat on the cover page. It wasn't just a pile of papers anymore. It was a loaded weapon. The moral lies of the Woods family had officially been reduced to criminal trash. Vance tapped the cover with his index finger. "I can file the injunction immediately. We can freeze every single asset attached to Richard's name by tomorrow morning. I can make the phone call to him right now." I stared at the red stamp. I ran my thumb along the smooth, sharp edge of the legal paper. If Vance called him, Richard would just deflect. He would play the victim. He would twist the narrative cry to the relatives and blame a banking error. A certified letter arriving in the mail wouldn't teach a narcissist anything. He needed to feel the absolute collapse of his ego. If you have ever had to bite your tongue and swallow your pride just to expose the truth about your own toxic family, please hit the like button and subscribe to my channel. Drop a yes in the comments if you know exactly how much it hurts to let a stranger see your family's dirty laundry. I shook my head. No, I said. My voice was as flat and deep as a frozen lake. I picked up the heavy document. I slid it into my leather bag. I pulled the metal zipper shut. A sharp metallic zip echoed in the quiet office. Don't file it yet, I instructed. I'm not doing this over the phone. I stood up and buttoned my heavy winter coat. I was going to let him keep playing his game. I was going to let him build up his fake authority, gather his audience, and puff out his chest. I was going to let him build his own scaffold right up until the exact moment I kicked the trapdoor open myself. Summer 2026, Chicago. The air in my apartment was thick, but it was quiet. Safe. Only the low hum of a desk fan broke the silence. The dim yellow light from the floor lamp cast long shadows against the bare walls. My phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. Then again, and again. The screen lit up the dark granite. Eleanor, we expect you here on Sunday. Your father has the paperwork ready. Derek, don't be late this time. We need to get this caregiver stuff finalized. I didn't blink. I didn't type out a furious paragraph about how they had abandoned me. I used the gray rock method. I stripped every ounce of emotion from my response. I became a brick wall. I understand. Hit send. See you then. Hit send. I locked the screen. The constant buzzing stopped. They took my short, lifeless texts as submission. Narcissists always mistake silence for surrender. Inside, I was drained. Dealing with my own blood was a slow, crushing exhaustion. It chewed through my nerves, draining me faster than the chemo they pumped into my veins 2 years ago. But I didn't pour a glass of bourbon. I didn't scream into a pillow. I anchored my mind to the physical world. Clinical precision. Control. I turned on the faucet. The cold water blasted against the stainless steel sink. I washed a head of lettuce, snapping off crisp leaves one by one. On the stove, a piece of salmon sizzled in a cast-iron skillet. The smell of burnt butter and seared fish filled the small kitchen. It grounded me. I moved to the ironing board. I plugged in the heavy steel iron. I waited for the red indicator light to click off. I laid out the cream silk shirt I was going to wear on Sunday. I pressed the hot metal into the fabric. Hiss. A cloud of white steam shot up. I guided the iron down the sleeve, erasing every single wrinkle. Perfect, sharp creases. Order out of chaos. A sharp knock on the front door broke the rhythm. I set the iron upright. I wiped my hands on a kitchen towel. I opened the door. Harper stood in the hallway, holding a greasy brown paper bag, smelling like garlic fries and cheap diner burgers. She was an ER trauma nurse. She knew exactly what a bleeding wound looked like, physical or otherwise. She walked in, dropping the bag on the counter. She didn't offer empty pity. She didn't tell me to forgive and forget. She just looked at the heavy leather bag sitting on my dining table, the bag holding the red-stamped financial audit. You ready for this? Harper asked, pulling a hot fry from the grease-stained bag. I picked up a glass of ice water. The condensation dripped down my knuckles. Yes. Having her standing in my kitchen reinforced the steel in my spine. I wasn't fighting alone anymore. This was my chosen family. Loyalty earned, not demanded by an accident of genetics. 15 miles away in Oak Park, the final trap was being set. Richard sat at the head of his mahogany table, perfectly satisfied. He took a slow sip of expensive scotch. I told you, Richard said, a smug grin spreading across his wrinkled face. He looked at Derek. She doesn't have a husband, no kids. She has to fall in line. It's the natural order of things. Derek nodded quickly, chewing on a handful of mixed nuts. He reached over and rubbed Megan's swollen belly. Exactly. It just makes sense. I can't be changing adult diapers, Dad. She's single. It's her job. They were drunk on a fake victory. They were happily designing a prison cell for me, planning a grand Sunday feast to welcome their new unpaid servant. Back in my apartment, the phone rang. It wasn't a text this time. Richard. I pressed the green button. I put him on speaker. I let the phone sit flat on the counter. Laura. His voice boomed through the tiny speaker, heavy with unearned authority. Sunday at 6. Don't be late. I have the responsibility transfer documents printed. We are signing them before dinner. He didn't ask. He ordered. I stared down at the glowing screen. I looked over at the leather bag sitting by the door. I kept my voice perfectly flat. I'll be there. I ended the call. The countdown started. Sunday night in Oak Park. The summer squall whipped heavy rain against the dining room glass. Inside the window, AC unit choked and rattled. The air was suffocating. The greasy smell of roasted lamb fat mixed with Eleanor's heavy, overpowering perfume. I stepped over the threshold, wearing black slacks and a cream silk shirt. My spine was straight. Eleanor rushed forward, wrapping me in a stiff, heavily perfumed hug. I kept my arms at my sides. I didn't lean in. I looked past her shoulder at the hallway wall. Framed photos lined the floral wallpaper. Derek's college graduation. Derek's $80,000 wedding. My face wasn't up there. The visual record of my life stopped at a faded high school portrait. We sat around the heavy mahogany table. Derek bounced his knee, shaking the floorboards. His face was flushed puffy. He checked his oversized watch, bored. Richard sat at the head of the table. His right hand gripped a serrated steak knife. His left hand was shoved deep under the white linen tablecloth. He was trying to hide the Parkinson's tremor, but the fabric vibrated against his thigh. Plates clattered. Silverware scraped against bone china. A sharp, nerve-grinding sound. Richard cleared his throat. A harsh, wet bark. The scraping stopped. The room went dead silent. He didn't look at me like a daughter. He looked at me like a line item on a ledger. The doctor says I need full-time daily support, Richard stated. His voice was loud, demanding. He didn't ask. The family talked this over. You are the obvious choice, Laura. You work from home. You don't have a husband or kids tying you down. It's time you moved back here and contributed to this house. Derek nodded immediately, his mouth full of lamb. Yeah, it makes the most sense. Work is killing me right now. Megan is about to pop. We just don't have the bandwidth, Laura. You taking this on fixes everything. They chewed their food. They swallowed my freedom like it was a side dish. At the office, I managed data systems that moved millions of dollars. I was respected. Here, I was just a free appliance, a convenient dumping ground. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I set my silver fork down on the porcelain edge. Clack. The sound cut through the heavy air. I smiled. A thin, cold line pulled across my face, but my eyes stayed dead. I looked at Derek, then at Eleanor, and finally locked eyes with Richard. Before I answer, I said, my voice was perfectly flat. When was the last time you asked if I was even alive? Richard scowled. He shifted his weight in the heavy wooden chair. What are you talking about? You look fine. I kept my eyes pinned to his. I had stage 3 breast cancer. I lost every single strand of my hair. I dropped 15 pounds. And I had to drain $47,000 from my own savings for medical bills because you told me you didn't have a dime. The room froze. The AC unit rattled in the corner. The silence was suffocating. Eleanor started to sniffle, a fake, watery sound. Laura, please. We were just so overwhelmed with the wedding. Derek stammered, his face turning an ugly shade of red. I didn't know it was that bad. Nobody told me it was stage 3. I didn't let them build the excuses. I reached down. I unzipped my leather purse. I pulled out my phone, tapped the screen alive, and slid it across the polished mahogany wood. It stopped right in the center of the table. Do you want to see the text where Dad told me to get a credit card to pay for my chemo? I asked. The air in the room turned to ice. Or the call history at 2 a.m. when Mom sent me straight to voicemail. Derek stared at the glowing screen. I leaned forward and swiped to the next image. Or maybe look at this. The hospital visitor log lit up the center of the table. 36 rounds of chemotherapy, 6 months of treatments. The visitor column stretched down the bright screen. One single word repeated 36 times in harsh black letters. None, none, none. The blue light reflected off Derek's ashen face. His mouth opened, but nothing came out. Richard's hidden hand shook violently under the tablecloth. The perfect polished lie of this family was entirely ripped apart. I leaned back in my chair, folding my hands in my lap. "So," I whispered, watching the panic set in. "Let's talk about family." Derek stared at the glowing glass screen sitting in the middle of the mahogany table. His thick fingers twitched. He pulled his hand back quickly, like the phone was burning hot. Beside him, Megan shrank deep into her upholstered dining chair. Her wide eyes shifted from the hospital visitor log on the screen to her husband. Pure, sharp disgust twisted her face. The perfect illusion was dead. Richard slammed his open palm on the table. The silver knives jumped. He was desperate to snatch back his crumbling authority. "That is in the past," Richard barked. His voice cracked high and thin, completely stripping him of his usual dominance. "What is the point of dragging up old history? I am sick right now. I need care." Eleanor lunged across the table. Her manicured nails dug hard into the cream silk of my sleeve, pulling the fabric tight. "Laura, please, we are a family." I looked down at her fingers. I didn't yell, I didn't argue. I just pulled my arm back with a sharp, violent jerk. Eleanor gasped, clutching her hand to her chest. I smoothed out the wrinkled silk on my sleeve. I pushed my chair back. The wooden legs screeched against the hardwood floor. I stood up. I was tall enough that my shadow fell directly across Richard's sweating face. The power dynamic in the room flipped in a single second. Family. I tasted the word. It was bitter, like chewing on a dry pill. Family picks up the phone at 2 in the morning when their kid is throwing up bitter bile on a bathroom tile. Family doesn't drop 80 grand on a country club buffet and leave their daughter to die alone. I pointed straight at Derek. He flinched, his shoulders hunching up to his ears. "You have a fully funded son sitting right there," I said. My voice was low, carrying across the dead quiet room. "You bought his car. You bought his wedding. Why don't you make him quit his job to wipe your chin?" Derek shrank under my finger. I can't do that," he mumbled, refusing to make eye contact. He stared at his plate of half-eaten lamb. "I have responsibilities. I have a life." I had a life too. The words cut through the heavy, greasy air. I leaned forward, resting my knuckles heavily on the table. "And I saved it myself, because you were all too busy." I turned my back on them. I walked toward the hallway. My leather heels clicked sharply against the oak floorboards. Even, steady, unbothered footsteps. Behind me, the dictator finally broke. A loud, ragged gasp echoed in the dining room. I stopped. I listened. It was Richard. The man who ruled this house with an iron fist for 30 years was sobbing. A pathetic, wet wheezing sound. He wasn't crying because he felt guilty. He was crying out of pure, terrifying panic. The scapegoat was walking out the door, and there was no one left to serve him. "Laura, please," Richard choked out. The heavy chair tipped backward as he tried to stand, his bad hand shaking violently. "Please, I'm scared. I can't do this alone. Don't leave us." Eleanor's mascara ran down her cheeks in thick, ugly black streaks. She sobbed, burying her face in her hands. I stood frozen in the hallway. Just 1 second of silence. 2. I turned around slowly. I walked back to the edge of the dining room. I looked at Richard. His face was blotchy, wet, and ancient. His shaking hand reached out toward me across the table. I felt absolutely nothing. The pity was dead. The anger was gone. I was just cleaning up a mess. My face was completely blank. I looked right into his terrified eyes. "I understand that you are scared," I said slowly. My voice was a flat, clinical dial tone. I paused. I let the silence stretch out, pulling the tension until it snapped. "But I can't deal with this right now." His exact words. Returned to the sender. Richard's wet eyes widened. He froze completely, turning to stone. The air left his lungs in a hollow wheeze. I didn't wait for a response. I turned around. I walked straight past the fake smiling family portraits lining the floral wallpaper. If you have ever had to walk away from toxic blood to save your own life, please hit the like button and subscribe to my channel. Drop a "done" in the comments if you know exactly how good it feels to finally choose yourself. I grabbed the heavy brass handle of the front door. I pulled it open. The stormy summer wind roared into the house, carrying the harsh smell of Chicago rain and wet asphalt. It swallowed Eleanor screaming completely. I stepped over the threshold into the dark. I pulled the heavy oak door. It slammed shut behind me with a loud final crack. The fallout hit the brick house in Oak Park fast. A week later, my phone vibrated violently against the glass coffee table. A harsh, mechanical rattle. The screen flashed Eleanor's name. I answered. Her voice was ragged, drained of its usual sugary poison. She spilled her desperation in a rushed whisper. Richard's condition was deteriorating rapidly. His hands shook too badly to hold a spoon. He needed someone to feed him and track his complicated pill schedule. Derek was forced to take emergency leave to cover the gaps. The golden child was crumbling instantly under the weight of ugly reality. Eleanor cried. Derek's corporate project was failing. His promotion was dead. Megan, heavily pregnant and trapped in a house full of constant screaming matches, finally understood why I walked away. Derek was facing the absolute tragedy of having to wipe his own father's chin. 2 years ago, I faced stage 3 cancer and managed my own vomit on freezing bathroom tiles alone. I stood by the window watching Chicago traffic crawl by. I listened to Eleanor's heavy breathing through the tiny speaker. I understand, I said. My voice was a flat dial tone. I pressed the red button. I didn't offer a single dollar. I didn't offer an hour of my time. 3 weeks later, the screen lit up with a long text message. Eleanor again. The manipulation was gone. The excuses were gone. It was an unconditional surrender. I failed to protect you. I watched you suffer, and I looked away. I am not asking for your forgiveness, but I am so sorry. Whatever you need. I read the words twice. The screen's harsh glare illuminated the dark room. 30 years. It took 30 years for my mother to figure out she had a daughter. I didn't delete the message. I didn't type out a reply. I set the phone face down on the glass table. Clack. The system was broken permanently. You can't glue rot back together. The final piece arrived by mail a month later. A plain white envelope sat in my metal mailbox. No return address. I carried it upstairs and sliced the flap open with a dull kitchen knife. Inside was a single sheet of cheap, thin-lined paper. I stared at the blue ink. The handwriting was jagged, slanted, pulling hard to the right. The violent, uncontrollable tremor of Parkinson's disease. It was a handwritten letter from Richard. The absolute surrender of a household dictator. I chose your brother's comfort over your survival. I let you drown because it was easier than fighting. I didn't lose you to a disease. I lost you because I was never the father you needed. I traced the smeared ink with my eyes. I didn't cry. I didn't feel a sudden rush of warmth. I processed the words clinically, scanning the cheap paper like an outdated financial report. He was finally looking in the mirror. It didn't change the past. Thursday night. The apartment smelled heavily of dark roast black coffee. Harper sat on my beige sofa. She held the piece of cheap-lined paper in her hands. She read Richard's jagged words in silence. The storm beat against the glass window. Harper carefully set the letter down on the coffee table. She looked up at me. How do you feel? Harper asked, her voice quiet. I stood, leaning against the kitchen counter. I held a thick ceramic mug in both hands. The heat seeped into my palms. I ran a diagnostic check on my own chest. I searched for pity. I searched for lingering guilt. There was absolutely nothing. Just a clean, cold, hollow space where the bleeding used to be. I took a slow sip of the bitter black coffee. I realized something, I said. I set the heavy mug down on the granite. You can't drain your own blood to keep people warm when they were the ones who threw you out in the snow. I picked up the piece of paper. I lined up the edges perfectly. I creased it down the middle, pressing my thumbnail hard against the fold. Then I folded it again. A neat, sharp square. I opened the bottom drawer of my oak desk. I dropped the letter inside. I pushed the heavy wooden drawer shut. The metallic click of the latch echoed in the quiet room. The physical and mental boundary was locked. May 2026. The clinic room was bright white, smelling sharply of rubbing alcohol and sterile plastic. Dr. Patterson flipped the last page of the lab report. He set the thin manila folder flat on the cold steel table. He looked up at me and nodded. The scans were completely clear. My body had burned out every last trace of the tumor, leaving nothing but healthy tissue behind. The remission was absolute. Later that week, Director Reeves walked right into my glass office. He dropped a thick, heavy envelope onto my oak desk. It was my official promotion to Senior Systems Manager. I was taking over an entire department handling the training for a new group of junior data analysts. That morning, I stood in front of my bathroom mirror. I carefully smoothed the crisp collar of my white button-down shirt. The woman looking back at me wasn't a desperate kid begging for scraps of affection anymore. She was someone who owned the map to her own life. Thursday night in Beacon Hill. The late afternoon sun filtered through the broad green leaves of the monstera plant sitting on my windowsill. The apartment smelled heavily of garlic-cracked black pepper and searing meat. James stood by the stove. He was a high school history teacher with quiet, understanding eyes. He used a pair of metal tongs to flip two thick steaks in the cast-iron skillet. The fat sizzled loudly against the hot iron. The front door unlocked. Harper walked in carrying a brown paper bag full of fresh groceries. Elena, a trauma surgeon coming straight off the night shift, followed her inside. We sat around the small wooden dining table. Forks clinked against the heavy ceramic plates. There were no hidden insults wrapped in polite fake smiles. No sudden, exhausting screaming matches. No suffocating manipulation. Just normal, boring stories about terrible city traffic and bad hospital coffee. I looked across the table. James handed Harper a glass of ice water. This was my circle. A chosen family built entirely on earned loyalty, not the toxic lottery of genetics. Over in Oak Park, the past was rotting exactly as expected. Eleanor still texted me sometimes. Short, timid messages asking about the weather. I didn't block her number. I just kept the door firmly shut. I replied with two completely neutral words. I'm fine. Our relationship was permanently frozen behind a wall of thick glass. I knew through Harper that Richard was bleeding his retirement fund dry to pay for a part-time home health aide. Derek only showed up twice a week. He treated the visits like a miserable heavy chore. The golden boy was finally feeling the crushing weight of real responsibility. I pulled my phone from my pocket. On the home screen, there was an archived photo album simply titled Family. It held the screenshots, the hospital logs, the brutal receipts of their betrayal. I didn't keep it to feed my anger. I kept it as a heavy steel shield, a permanent reminder of the exact price you pay when you hand over control of your life to people who only view you as an asset. Late afternoon. The city was loud. I sat in a quiet corner booth of a downtown coffee shop, staring out the thick window at the rush hour traffic. I picked up the heavy ceramic mug and took a slow sip of my hot latte. The bitter espresso cut perfectly through the steamed milk. The bleeding had stopped. The wounds were permanently closed. The biggest lesson I learned in 30 years didn't come from a textbook or a corporate training course. It came from a freezing cold bathroom floor. Blood does not make you family. Family is not an obligation handed down by birth. Family are the people who stand right next to you when the floor collapses under your feet. They are the ones who help you carry the heavy weight when you can't stand up alone. If you have ever had to walk away from toxic relatives to build a real family of your own, please hit the like button and subscribe to my channel. Drop a true in the comments if you know exactly how it feels to finally find your chosen people. I looked down at my phone one last time. The screen glowed brightly, illuminating the dark wooden table. I pressed the side button. The screen went completely black. I slipped the phone deep into the pocket of my coat. I stood up. I wrapped a heavy navy blue cashmere scarf tightly around my neck. I pushed the heavy glass door open. The sharp spring wind of Chicago hit my face. I stepped out onto the concrete pavement, blending seamlessly into the fast-moving crowd. The ledger was finally closed.